All right, I think we've probably leveled off for the moment, so maybe we could get going. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jason Donati, and I am a teaching professor and acting chair of the Department of Art and Design in the College of Arts, Media and Design at Northeastern. It is my pleasure, on behalf of the Media Studios organization, to welcome you to the first talk of the new Humanics in Media and Technology lecture series. How do Humanics, the integration of technical abilities, data evaluation, and human disciplines, creativity, entrepreneurship, innovation, empathy, and cultural agility, influence our work in media and technology? In this lecture series, we will explore how makerspaces, audio production studios, and immersive media labs are being shaped by growing pressures to build skills to keep ourselves relevant alongside rapid advances in media and technology. Beginning with today's talk, we will discuss transformations in our current educational practices to stay in step with lifelong learning and a humanics-centric education. We're extremely excited and honored to have Rick Anderson with us today to give his talk entitled The New Uncanny Valley, How AI has Helped Skip the Uncanny Valley and Fool Humans into Thinking Things Are Real. Rick is a director of virtual worlds and games research and immersive design, the GRID group at Rutgers University. He is also co-founder of the Rutgers Makerspace Project, as well as co-founder and trustee of Foocars, the Fair Use Building and Research Labs. He has code-authored Pro Arduino, which helps makers and electronic enthusiasts become professionals with their projects. He is also co-creator and continual sponsor for the Rutgers University Information Technology Senior Capstone Project, Make a Thing and Pitch a Company. He's currently creating the AI Maker Series for middle and high school teachers, which combines the power of makerspaces, fabrication labs, and machine learning to create game-playing cars and robots. A couple of mechanical notes before I turn the virtual floor over to Rick. We will have ample opportunity for Q&A and comments at the end of his talk. Please feel free to write your questions directly into the chat, and we will make sure as best as possible to get to those questions during the allotted time. Lastly, I do want to let you know that this talk is being recorded and will be posted on the lecture series website. So without further ado, please welcome Rick Anderson.
Yeah, hey everybody. I'm just going to share my screen real quick to fire this up. And oh my goodness, what a cool project, Humanics. And the things that I've heard from Northeastern and the groups involved, I am incredibly impressed. So I've had a unique experience at Rutgers bringing these spaces together. And it sounds like that's happening over in Northeastern where you guys are. So anyway, I'm so excited. And I'm so excited, of course, to talk about this. So one of the things about it's like the new canny, the new uncanny. That's kind of an interesting thing in phrases and phrasing. So anyway, I'll be diving into this topic, and we're kind of going to go on like a pretty wide adventure: technology, machine learning, canny, uncanny, all kinds of things that are now in our virtual spaces in our worlds. And now we virtualize our meetings. We've done that before, but so many more of us are doing that. So some of this is helpful. Some of this shows where the scary parts are, maybe not, but it was very, well, I guess without further ado, I should just kind of move on into this presentation and get it going, because I want to get to the Q&A where I get to answer questions and hear what you all think. So yeah, I'm Rick Anderson. I've been introduced, and I'm like, well, how did AI help skip the uncanny valley and fool humans into thinking things are real? So we're going to break that down. And I think it's already been mentioned that I put together a game research immersive design at Rutgers, where we do virtual worlds, makerspaces, and games. And the missing ingredient now is I've been really incorporating machine learning and saying, how does it impact all these things? What can we learn by pulling all this together? So that's I think with these ingredients, you get to have that opportunity. It's really rare to have that all come together. So I want to start with the uncanny. So the uncanny origin is between Dr. Good old Sigmund Freud and Dr. Jentz. And there are basically two papers. The paper with Jentz kind of put out the idea of the uncanny being particularly favorable for a condition for unwaking uncanny sensations is created when there is intellectual uncertainty whether an object is alive or not. when an inanimate object becomes too much like an animate one. So this is kind of, so, okay, we've got these things in the world. Are they alive or not? Do they have all these, what is this condition for awaking uncanny situations? So it's kind of this normal, unnormal, it's all of these things together. Now, Freud takes it, kind of just spends a lot of time working on the topic. So what I'm pulling from him is the uncanny is that class of the terrifying, which leads back to something long known to us, once familiar. So that's the sort of story, the pattern that I'm kind of following along here, is that there's a lot of things that are familiar to us. They're all part of our day. Like, you know, meeting people in person is very familiar to us, but now we're meeting virtually all the time. That's a little uncanny, but you know, is it truly terrifying? Or now that we really are doing it, has it changed? Is it something new now? So, you know, this process is kind of going to the point, what ingredient, what is it that you add to something that makes it uncanny? So that sets the stage of this sort of like uncanny question. The next one is from a paper in 1978, Masahiro Mori put together the Uncanny Valley graph. Turned out, as a matter of translation, somebody said, okay, well, uncanny seems like this, and they jammed it together. So what Mori did was take human likeness from a 0 to 100, and then did familiarity and affinity up and down, and then said, if it moves like a human, humans move like humans, so no problem. But if I'm on this chart, this graph, I go up through it, I have a stuffed animal, I have a humanoid robot, I have an industrial robot. Some of those things move. And what's interesting is the less human likeness, like you can say, oh, well, that's not threatening as a human. The uncanny part isn't there because it's not more like a human is. So, you know, like a corpse is superhuman-like, but it's also uncanny. It's not something people feel great about. We've created zombies, for instance, in our zombie movies, and that makes people even more creepy because it's not a human, but it moves. Well, what about a robot that moves like a human, right? All of those things are there. Prosthetic hands are useful, right? They're incredibly important, but they're also not perceived as like real. So like there's how you change that. How do you move something that should have a good affinity, should be perceived, as a helpful, but it's being perceived more as part of that creepy scale. And so the way this uncanny valley here works is that the closer you get to human movement, there's a sort of increase of, boy, this is not feeling good. This is not where we want to be. So that's that dip in the curve. And that brings us to like what they call the uncanny valley. And taking a quick peek into that, it's usually visuals. Visuals are really a key for trying to figure that out. So Polar Express, if people remember when that movie came out, there was a kind of a backlash. It was like, oh, these characters got great voice actors, but they're real, but they're just not working out. And then you have almost 13 years later, you have Mass Effect Andromeda. The characters look great, their mouths are moving, but they did procedural eye mapping and procedural moving. So you had characters that would look the wrong way while they were talking at you, or their eyeballs would start spinning. You know, it's sort of like they got so close to human, but it went, no, that is no good. So they had to patch it. They had to go back and like redirect the scenes and update that whole procedural work they were doing. And so this is when people talk about Uncanny Valley. Oftentimes it's the avatar, it's the character. That's what we're seeing. But I would go one more direction, is that when human computers, instead of us looking at the robot, we are also the person being judged by the robot. So this is another sort of it's an abrupt transition here, but it's proving you are human. So we look at those characters and we're like, they aren't human. They're characters in show, they're telling a story, no problem, right? But it's really weird and more unsettling. In this case, it's kind of reversed. The bot is actually saying to us on a daily basis, you know, hey, are you real? So this whole CAPTCHA thing came up, completely automated public Turing test to tell computers and humans apart, CAPTCHA. So that's pretty telling there, which is that now the robot is judging you. A robot saying, are you creepy? Well, they're not saying they're creepy, but they're saying, well, you're human enough, so we're going to allow you to bank. We're going to allow you to pay your taxes online. We'll let you do those human things that we virtualized. And I'm going to say on the box, yeah, sure, click, I'm not a robot, right? But it turns out there's a whole study and a whole bunch of technology out there that's like, do people behave like a robot? So there's like the street signs. Do I look at a street sign and find how many of them are real? But the technology's gotten better. So if you look at CAPTCHA version 3, we have like, because people shake or because people move in a certain way, and they're not like the microsecond movements of decision making, then we found a pattern, and that pattern has proved to a robot that you're human. And now you don't have to always click the "I'm not a robot" button. So that's like was it Google's CAPTCHA 3 version, or reCAPTCHA 3. So proving you're human is a really interesting problem, because maybe you have a password. If you have a password, you're human. But to me, this is sort of another version of we're in this kind of strange space now. We're not like where we were with like, oh, we're judging against a human to be a human, and therefore there's what, you know, hey, we got it. Like if they're not like it, they're not. But now it's the other way around. So this is where I'm getting to virtual robots. So bots and robots and virtualizing things. So we've got both the virtual human doing the activity. We also have robots who are physically roboting. And then we have bots, which are virtual robots that are pretending to be human and banking for you by potentially removing all the money out of your bank account. So we have like bot armies. We have disinformation campaigns. Those are in that space. They're really easy to work with. And it's interesting to see these virtual bots be so prevalent or so multiple. So we're also mediating that. Those bots are also helping us, right? They're judging us as to be human. Different tech, but still you have an inanimate thing saying, are you human? Should you do this? And then they go like, you should do this, but hey, we could do that for you. So, you know, that kind of happens. And it also brings up at the same time, this question is when you're working online, what are your senses, right? So I have eyes, I can see what I'm seeing. I can type, I can feel when typing words. I can hear, so I got my hearing, but there's the sense of smell or a variety of types of touch and interaction or stereoscopic vision. Those aren't really the senses that we're using online. But if you look at, I keep using the bank account, but if you look at your bank balance and it's really low, you start feeling, oh, you know, you have a reaction. Those things become real to you. You know, games are like that as well. Games start to become real. You break that barrier and you feel really connected. So that's where I say we're kind of hitting a new Canny Valley. This Canny Valley is like, you know, it's got all these awesome, useful things, very prudent, you know, nice things that we'd have. It's strangely familiar because we're doing banking, we're doing our daily life, we're meeting with each other, no problem. But, you know, we still have a valley. We have this uncanny valley that is sort of like, if I told you the story before you had the experience, you would feel like this is very strange. Then you have the experience and you're told the story, it's not quite so. So the new Canny Valley, it's this place where, you know, we feel good. Everything's fine. You know, this is fine. So okay, so, you know, like, you know, this new world is not so perfect. So, but it's beautiful. It's so nice. We get to do so many things that we never did before. And in fact, this, you know, collaborative online humanity is happening. Wow. So I want to take it another step, which is that we've always had learning. We learn from books. There's a process of learning that I call virtual learning. And I'm going to bring in my experience from makerspaces and bring my experience from teaching middle to high school students. The group that I was with about 10 years ago loved Minecraft, and they discovered they could make microcontrollers and ALUs and all kinds of amazing devices in Minecraft. So they did it in 3D, and this 3D shape created these logical operations that were building computers virtually. So one of the students came in one day with a handful of electronics, slammed them down on the table and said, all right, I want to make what I made in Minecraft in real life. And suddenly, the virtual learning process is now very concrete. We designed up circuit boards, all kinds of things, and I actually created a whole workshop series out of it. And when we look at the picture all the way on the right of the screen here, what we should be seeing there is that there's a pile of wires. It's so complicated, it's crazy. And so at the end of the workshop, there was an exasperation, like, yes, we did it. Except it was like, but if I had done it in Minecraft, we would have done like 15 of these. We'd have done 20 of these. So they were finding out virtually learning is just fast. Virtual learning, boom, 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 no problem. You iterate, you know, you're doing good. And then now you start moving into reality. It didn't take me long to design a virtual circuit that looked pretty good, but it took everyone a lot longer to actually have wires that had length and ends that had to go to the right places. And that debugging, that real life got in the way and made it so less efficient. So virtual learning is crazy cool, but we have that problem of getting into the real world. So that's that amazing space, like a virtual space like Minecraft allows you to iterate learning incredibly quickly. Now that's where another angle comes in, which is we're online, we're doing all this stuff, we work together, we have distributed teams, we're using virtual learning for that. So I'm going to do a quick quote from basically, this is the design sprint learning process. So Google, Code with Google or Google Design Sprint, and all of these groups have adopted this learning process as part of, hey, let's do a project, let's make a new product, let's do this thing, let's make it valuable for everybody. So in this case, is kind of just similar to that Minecraft DIY process of iterating virtually, then building physically. The design thinking concept is you got your idea, you go to learn, idea, learn, idea, learn. And then you're like, I'm ready to build. Okay, now you built. Did it do a launch? Did you launch? You go back through this, you have quick iterations, you go through all this stuff, you go through this wonderful process, you build and launch. So you'll notice like you're not going all the way through that process every single time. So that's the waterfall kind of scariness. But in this case, that iteration is there. So this is a virtual learning pattern where, again, speed of learning is one thing, a building, launching experience is another space. So just want to get that out there. So this, I'm moving really fast. So I would say, let's take one of these learning processes, and that's vision. So if we're going to take that process and virtualize what we see, and that's one of the easiest ones to work with, because right now we see that we're in, say, WebEx or Zoom or one of these tools, and we can interact with the pixels. Our brain is doing this all for us, but I got a machine learning algorithm attend with me, and it could be watching this. So it needs to look at the world as data. So you have NumPy, and you have a bunch of other things. You have matrices, and you have like a symbol or an image. So on this one, I'm looking at seeing the world as data. In the middle graph, I have like what's either a plus or an X. And so that's kind of interesting. Human, even just with very simple patterns, a human goes, well, is it a plus or an X, right? All right, great. And then if I'm a computer, I just straighten it out, and it's an alternating line. So these are all the same pieces of data, just visualized in a different way, but we're breaking the world down into those patterns. And the human has to go like, well, do I mean that it's an X or a plus, or is it inverted? Which is the, even binary is kind of a tricky spot for like, what are we interpreting here? But computer vision will break it down into matrices, true and falses, and grayscale, and other layers. But it's seeing the world as data. Another way to think of the world as data is steganography. So we've got a technique that's been used, well, quite a while, hiding pictures in pictures, right? There's a whole art to that. Well, one of them is steganography, is the science of that, where you have circles with, like in this case, numbers. And if I put all of them on top of each other, stack, 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 I can grab a red or a blue or a green film, and I'll be able to see, oh, it's a 3, it's a 4, it's a 5. So in the same way that we've put the world into data, this is another thing that is put into data, is information. So we're converting this information, and I can see it if I filter it right. So seeing and filtering are all kind of put there. And you'll see it's also, what is it? When you're not quite able to see, it'll come off like noise, right? It's just a noisy image until you find a way to look at it and you can reveal the information. So machine learning, and this is the other part, was that I've introduced the machine learning into our maker spaces. I've got a lot of crossover projects beginning, but we have to take that idea of that virtual vision and say, I'm going to plug this into the machine learning process. And this is going to give us some superpowers later on, but we got to get there somehow. So with machine learning, the basic unit is a perceptron, and that's the neuron that holds the true or false. And then, like I was saying before, we have these patterns of yes or no's or black and white. And then frequently the place you go is numbers. You say, this is an 8 and I hand wrote it. Now I got to break it down into little tiny pixels, and I got to store those into neurons. Once they're in neurons, there's a whole process that takes place. But you have to be able to break the visual field down into data for that to happen. And it's happening all the time, right? Again, it's pre-happening in our Zoom setup. So one of the spaces, just to have a picture of a neural network, a convolutional neural network, is just to have it a little bit there, because we're gonna jump out of the tech piece in a sec. But the idea is I've got like a 3, and I need to break it down into subsampling, and I need to convolve it and do manipulations, and it finds the features that I'm interested in and stores them across the neurons. And then at some point, there's another set that does a classification process that says these are weighted a certain way, and that weighting gives me the idea that maybe it's a 3. It also is the weighting gives me an idea that maybe it's a cat. And what I have is a confidence value that says by the time I'm done, I feel 90% confident that that's a 3, or 10% confident that it's a cat. So there's basically this confidence value, and you repeat this process. This is essentially virtualized learning. What'll happen is you go from left to right, left to right, left to right, and you test it against your data sets. And as the data set is gone through, you have a piece of it that's never seen before. So you do this process of training on known data, testing on unknown data. And this is a great technique. It's really good for generalizing. So it's a kind of a go-to image of, I've got some input, I break it down, I find features, I connect up the weights, and out comes my confidence in whatever I saw. So that's the pattern. This is just another way to look at it, is that you've got input images that are input in, they're broken down into their filters and kernels, and they convolve into smaller elements. And what actually the representation, internal representation, is kind of like a weird data memory model, so that it says, hey, these are the elements that make sense at this point in time for the decision, or I'm holding some form of dogness, or I'm holding some form of catness or numberness in here. And that's how I store it. So then I get information, I'm going to say it's going to be this thing. So anyway, that's it. This is that little type of network. So long story short, this is machine learning as virtual learning. And in that space, there's basically 3 techniques that matter to how we, what is it? These 3 techniques get us to where we are today, is essentially the next component. So there's the idea that there's a thing called supervised learning, and that is demonstrations. Another one is reinforcement learning, which is actually very much like game-based learning. And then you have a generative adversarial network called the GAN, and that's the warring of, or the putting of 2 networks to fight each other until outcomes are looking pretty good. So those are the 3 main techniques. I'll just keep moving. So supervising has like the most classic pattern. This is kind of like the type of teaching where you provide examples of the behavior you want to test. You separate the data into trained data sets, the never seen before and the we're learning on. And then you do a balance between undertrained and overtrained. So it's a balance between memorized versus just really no info. Then you basically have the process, you review the results. And supervised training, what you'll do is you can say like, well, this is bad information. Let's pull it out so we'll only train you on the good stuff, and then we'll do it again. It's kind of like video editing. You take out the bad takes and suddenly you have the great take. But you still have the problem of overtrained or only doing what you expected. So you do things like collect new data and you reinforce the behaviors by what you're collecting. So again, it's just that learning loop, just over and over again. So in this, I'm going to jump to, this is the space where I learned about machine learning, is creating the Foocars Project. It's basically a DIY autonomous car based off of a sports car. There's also DIY robocars out there. There's some pretty cool projects based on this, but it's the smallest of the edge computing. It brings you all the way over to like really tiny devices for little money, and they're going to try to run around like smart cars. But when in action, things don't quite go as you figure. So we trained them on cones. You probably won't hear the voices and fun in this particular thing. But what did our cars learn? We had them drive around cones, and we trained them, and then we put them in front of people, a bunch of kids. So I'm going to just hit this video for a second. Oh no, no. Press that and not move. So the car is actually driving itself around the cones. It's playing with the kids, but it doesn't really know who they are. And then the one girl has pink pants, and this is where things go wrong. Is it's learned that bright colors are what it should follow, not orange cones. So this is one of those moments where you learn what your car, oh, it learned such good stuff about driving, but it didn't learn orange cone, it learned bright color because it didn't have something distinguished. So now you got to go back and train for that. And that's a repeated process. And again, it's pretty expensive because we have to go all the way back to build the car. We have to go back and put the stuff on the car. We've got to eventually put it in front of people and have that kind of weird training experience. So reinforcement learning, this is the classic. This is going to be game style. And it's I'm going to teach myself to run by falling a whole bunch of times. So we've seen a bunch of that. But one of the things that's really also interesting is in a car space, these DIY cars at Bristol, they did traffic calming. So what they did was they learned to drive a figure-8 and actually control traffic by going faster or slower. So that was actually done all in a game engine, a virtualized game engine, and then it used the reinforcement learning to teach itself what it needed to do to calm traffic. So I mean, it's pretty powerful stuff. Then the other part is reinforcement learning. Because it's this game scenario, it's like setting up all the rules, and if you do well with the rules, you're really good. But it's also like rules lawyers. You can find ways around it. So there are a lot of games, like this is the first one where they told a robot to walk around, but don't use your legs. So it found a way to pop upside down and walk on its elbows. So not very natural, but it totally figured it out. So in reinforcement learning, you can't guarantee all of the cases. Supervised learning, you can't guarantee all the cases either. But in supervised learning, I can go back and provide an example of this is how you should handle it. Whereas reinforcement learning, you would say, let's keep doing this until we figure it out. And is that a benefit that it's actually that creative of a rules lawyer? And the other element of this is we've got like this is where robotic hands are, like solving Rubik's cubes. This is now something that these little hands do. And one I want to point out is there's definitely sensors on that hand, but the eyes, how does it know where the colors are? Well, turns out all of the cameras surrounding it are what's looking at it. So how it knows colors and things, it could actually have color sensors in the fingers, but there are all kinds of creative ways, but it's very interesting to see a hand do this activity. So this is something like, also in our Uncanny Valley, right? It doesn't look very human. It's not like a human hand doing this, like sticking out of a wall. It's a robotic hand. Though the fingers and the dexterity are very, very similar. So there is a point where sometimes this could be the creepiest thing you've seen, or it could be like, oh, it's not real, so no big deal. But this is the reinforcement learning of learning and training, trying to get to the real world, into the physical space. And that's what this successfully did. So now you have game-based, we have supervised, and I would say you have the last in my little category is the generative adversarial network. And this one is, I want to draw you a picture, and you say, well, I want pictures of flowers. And one of the networks builds this idea of, here's a bunch of flowers for you. And you have another network that says, oh, that's not a flower, that's a flower, and they go back and forth. Then you have to provide stuff like, well, did you mean what a human would look like as a flower? What do humans perceive as a flower? Because sometimes you have to actually make those distinctions. And how do you do that? Well, this is sort of the beginning of something that's, each paper has to think of how do they do that and how do they measure that? And so one of the common things is to build what they call an inception score. So the inception score is sort of how well did it just make a flower? And if a human said a flower was this, would you be able to say my network created a flower that was like what the human said? So this is the beginning of an interesting measurement. And that gets us to none of these faces are real. I think this is like one of the classics. It's like, okay, you've got a whole bunch of faces that aren't real. And this is from like a year ago. And I don't have the current one. If you go to this person does not exist, this time, I'm just going to throw it up there. You can just reload even more higher higher resolution with just incredible detail, as well as wholly different details of what is actually being created and what's looking. So where the generative adversarial networks are doing quite amazing work at the moment. So sorry, presentation, there it is. Okay, so that's one of the pinnacles of this, was that when we finally could make virtual humans. And then now that we can do that, now you can do something like, well, how could we attack or go after vision? Because in this case, we fooled people into making celebrities or fake celebrities or people who are just normal. But what if we are trying to do something on purpose? So one of those is, well, if I can fool a computer algorithm, and this is an example here, is I'm going to take a panda, I'm going to add some noise to that panda. And interestingly enough, in the result, as a human, I don't see the noise. As a network, though, the network actually sees the noise and says, this panda is a given. So there is a way to add noise into the world such that it fools your computer algorithm. And it'll say things like, this is a monitor or a screen or a notebook. It can mess up the predictions by changing the values. So this is add a whole bunch of noise that is just slightly like, oh, it seems fuzzy to a human. But to a machine learning algorithm, it's a severe attack on its understanding. And this gets us to things like, say, the 1 pixel hack. This one is, if I know all about the algorithm, I could probably find a spot in the image that will misclassify something. So a horse is a frog, a deer is an airplane. And all it is a low resolution 1 pixel placement. And that's because I understand kind of how the algorithm works. So I'm going to throw in some noise in certain spots. So this is the thing, is these networks are attackable, and depending on techniques you use, the networks can have problems. And this one is a generative adversarial, so it's sort of like trying to act like a human, but this is where it's failing because of those little pixels. So then there's a question, well, how should we see? And this gets to, how do humans see? Hacking the human vision system. So another paper came out, was called Adversarial Examples That Fool Both Computer Vision and Time-Limited Humans. So the time-limited part is, that's the key, is if you have a lot of time, you can figure it out. But in this case, this is an example of a cat dog. It's not a German Shepherd, it's a cat. And it scored low in the confidence that it was a cat, and it was kind of low on confidence that it was a dog, but then you blended it just a little tiny bit, and boom, you have a cat that looks like a German Shepherd. So these systems, like for like, it's like you can add a little noise and persuade it, or you can sort of know that it's possible humans have some value. In this case, they developed like an inception score that says, well, humans are fooled more at this value versus that value. Again, relevant to this paper, but that's where that went. And then the crazy part is now you're developing food that looks tasty, maybe not, but we're developing things that look like food, and you have sliders. And I actually have a link to a live site where you move the sliders around and it looks more like a burger and less like a burger. And again, using a paper like that, you would use like the score that says, hey, this is where humans are mostly fooled and mostly not. Like one of them has pickles folding up onto the bun. But if you're like looking at it quickly, you can't see that. So that's blending the reality. We're sort of mixing and matching. We're taking other objects than humans, and now we're creating those. So this is where I'm calling the inception score. So each of these papers try to measure how much data in their set is like, what would fool the human? What would cause a value to be if it was greater than this and lesser than that? So in this case, it's, at minimum, it's a value which the adversarial network can be fooled, but because our vision system is in reality not perfect, we have the same problem, just a different inception score. So I have so many pieces to this, but that sets up the machine learning part. Neato stuff, nuts and bolts. I just want to hit accessibility real quick, because accessibility is this massive thing, and machine learning has changed how we can engage with that. So one of the examples here is games that play themselves. So I have a Arduino, and this is not me, but this particular project is actually playing a ball balancing game using a controller with a servo on board. So the idea in this space is that our traditional ideas of accessibility are totally transformed. So if this can play this, I could set it up and be voice controlled and it could play for me. So we have this mixing of senses and mixing of actions between real and virtual. So accessibility is this new area where machine learning is having a massive impact. And I would say we haven't seen even the beginnings of this yet, but that's the piece. So again, machine learning has learned to play things like baseball, Go, chess, classic Mario, Dota, all of these massive games. The machine learning can play it for you. The crazy part is, like, if you wanted to say an old video game was accessible, well, they weren't, because you had to use that particular controller. So with machine learning, you're actually, instead of it playing the game for you necessarily, it's opened up the idea that it can get you access to the game. So you could change and build your own custom controllers and custom interfaces that give you access to things that you couldn't have access before. You could make them voice controlled. You could do a lot of working with it. And that's where makerspaces are coming in, just as a super creative space, is that you can go there and start making these things. The machine learning as an ingredient is kind of what's new. It's allowing you to remix some senses. And the other part is microcontrollers themselves have now become powerful enough that I can put some of the machine learning right on the controller. So I don't need the full computer. I just need voice recognition on here. I need something that does eye tracking in a small form factor. You know, it depends on the size of your networks, but you're now able to smooth out, using machine learning, the stuff on the real devices so they work better with the virtual devices. So that's, it's just like, wow, holy smokes. So, and this is if we didn't do extended reality work and didn't work with this, you wouldn't have this synesthesia idea. We're like cross-wiring senses. We're hearing colors, you get the sound of emotions, microphones and webcams, all these devices are now there for that mixture. So you're kind of making accessibility through the technology or through the machine learning. And that's good. There really is creating ways to get people access to things they never had access to before. And then inclusion, the inclusion component. I tested this on my own staff. We had a face tracking thing. It was pip install, face tracking. You can see the paper over here. And the crazy part was, like, one person got recognized as a doorknob. We had 3 people recognized as one. We had the white guy recognized in the background. It was just an amazing mess. So out of the box, you can't trust that machine learning is inclusive. So you just, it's just not what you're gonna, you know, you got to do something on purpose. And being inclusive here would be. So I had one person, Ringoli, who was recognized as everybody. So anytime she came in, it didn't show as herself, but everybody else. I had Lavina and Kenny being interchangeable. And I had people on the background being recognized. It was just crazy. So these are, it's out there. So what am I doing about that? This is where I think makerspaces and our virtual and augmented reality people really need to get together. So I created I think a project that was around DIY image classification for inclusion. So I run a virtual AI study group, and what we were doing was machine learning techniques on family photos, using your own collection, using what you could do with your own, like, technology, rather than say Google does it for you. It's what can we do to recognize our own family and our own family's histories, and try it out with actual people that are in pictures from 50 to 100 years ago. So that was like one of the things, is to really, like, try it out. One guy, his family photos he started with was like he could recognize maybe about 8 people. And now he has like 13,000 photos that all have clustering that show, like, events where they were with each other. Absolutely amazing. I mean, it was 6 months of study groups and stuff, but absolutely amazing. So this is where finally, I would say we've kind of hit this new Canny Valley, and it's uncanny in many ways. So we've got, sort of on a scale of 0 to 1 for human, you know, what should that y-axis be? You know, for humans, do you make it all the way to 1 for being human? The other part is we could call the inception score as a thing for fooling humans. It's not universal, but it'd be really interesting to know, you know, is that a technique that it can be used to sort of say, what kind of fooling humans? You know, are we talking about data? Are we talking about seeing or hearing? And then what about an inclusion score? You know, you gotta actually say, is this technology got some kind of inclusion so that you know, like, are you actually covering the people on purpose the way you intended to? And then accessibility, can people get to it? Should there be an you know, zero to human and accessibility? You know, how do you, where's the feel for that? We should feel good if we're getting those things, but do we measure those and can we? So this is where I just want to hit a couple of areas that are both the good and the bads. So health and hacking. Identifying lung cancer is really coming along. Identifying things that are in like slides, super awesome, technical, sometimes better than humans. But the converse of it is you can, well, you could remove the lung cancer or you could add the lung cancer. So this is like in its one view, the canny, the beautiful view, the shrewd way to use this is for identifying lung cancer, but it opens up the vector of, well, something could add that to photos that didn't need it. So there's risk there. And I think that's a spot where like the uncanny starts to come back. Hacking the games people play. This was actually just a little project that we can link off to that. It was like identifying when do you steal a base or not? Well, it turned out this guy just did it as a cool project, but you know, it's used in the World Series. And there's a big cheating problem around that, decoding everyone's signs. So then you kind of like, oh, fun, neat to do. And then, yeah, it really blows up. The other is endless spam. You know, writing GP2, learning languages. I'm actually working on a project about learning languages using machine learning. But endless spam and just endless text generation, that just outpaces what humans can consume. So the ability to know that what you're reading is generated either by human or trustable, you know, like sometimes human is not trustable, you know, all of that fits. So anyway, this is endless spam. The other one is like the DeepFake space, where this is the adversarial generative network, figures it out, but now I'm transferring my voice to Obama, or I'm transferring my voice to Trump, you know, or not just voice, the whole mannerisms and everything, and adding new material. And this is definitely the, well, it looks okay, why shouldn't I? You know, it's like, no, it's terrible, you know, it's frightening. It's, you know, there's uncanny there, but did you see it? Audio fakes, same deal. You don't get the interesting problem there is that voice goes kind of like not left to right, but it's sequential, so it's a little trickier, but still it's working. The other one is this thing called look to listen. So these other techniques are, this is just two comedians talking at the same time, and if I click on one, I can hear him. Click on the other, I hear him. But the idea is it works for a crowd. You throw a video camera on a crowd and you start clicking on people, or you go to a restaurant and you click on people, you can hear that conversation filtered out of the noise. I mean, that's actually what these machine learning algorithms are great at, is filtering out what you're trying to find from the noise. And so, yeah, so now you have the idea of crowds and being able to hear what they say. And that's a weird version of not privacy. And then I think you get super abilities like seeing through walls. So in this case, Wi-Fi absorbs into the human body a certain way, and you're actually able to extract poses by having a receiver between the two areas. So you have like a receiver that says, hey, these dense areas are actually human bodies and they have a particular pose. And that's actually somebody walking through and being seen through the wall. So just a quick one there is that, yeah, once you know the human shape, you're able to identify how it should appear in this noisy waveform. So you've got seeing through walls, so you kind of have superpowers, but you know, these are still new enough that they're not productized, right? They haven't launched into companies or anything. And I would say I'm finally getting to the scariest of the scenarios. It's this unmasking of privacy. Sometimes people can't get away with it if they're found. And this is a whole scary area, because There's people using facial recognition on Flickr and Google Photos and Facebook and Twitter, and they're like looking for people and then exposing them and telling stories, or privacy is not what we thought it was. So this whole face tracking is both the good and the bad. People who shouldn't be doing things, can be found, and that seems good. But in China, people are, doing the same technology on Hong Kong protesters. So I think we have, something that is, super amazing, a lot of good tech. This is something we can do in our maker spaces, but really the world is full of ways this technology is used as if it appears fine. So I don't have a really good, happy thing to lay on for this, but that's kind of the deal. So I'm just going to round out with that kind of question. It looks okay, but that's not okay. So anyway, I'm going to wrap this up, and I'm going to say I'm available for questions and stuff. I actually chewed into more time, sorry.
Well, first of all, thank you so much. How about a big virtual round of applause?
Woo, yeah!
All right, thank you.
Yeah, so I think we have about 10 minutes here, and there are a few questions that have been posed. So maybe I'll just throw some out there and see how many we can get to. The first one is, should we make things more realistic or less realistic in order to minimize uncanniness?
Ooh, yeah. So that one is interesting because I think oftentimes it's what you ask it to do matters towards whether that would actually be uncanny or not. Sometimes if it's like I was saying, that robotic hand, it's not enough like a real hand to totally freak you out, but it's kind of like a real hand, but it's doing a Rubik's Cube. So that's not like so crazy. That's not threatening in any kind of way. But as soon as you put a knife in that hand, you've changed it. That's not what it's uncanny now. So I would say both in, there's a continuum, and there's what's the context of what are you having it do?
Got it. Another question is, how many dimensions does your consciousness rotate through on any given day?
I don't count, but evidently, if you followed my talk, I went through a few of them.
All right, we also have a question that says, what are your thoughts on 360 immersive storytelling with virtual reality or augmented reality?
Oh, cool. So this is such a crazy cool area. The 360 storytelling, like one of them with 360 is you can provide location, and you can be next to somebody, but you can't really touch them, right? You're near, but not there, but you're near. So that actually matters. Like some forms of empathy work just fine if you're close enough to feel connected. The fact that you can't touch, that's not where you're not trying to give a big hug in that space, right? So there's things with that. Virtual reality, like going like full on VR, you could do a lot of things that you just, you could do swapping. You could say, I'm this person and you're that person, and you can move things around in different kinds of ways. So there's a lot of experimentation there, and sometimes what comes from that can, if you're trying to get the feeling of something else, not you, sometimes the virtual stuff is really great. The 360, you're in the story, you're next to it, that kind of deal. Let's see, and then augmented reality. One of the things I found is we did a whole bunch of games for Rutgers called the Arbitrail, and it was walk through the Arbitrail, collect all the stuff. And then I realized, just as we were going into all of the COVID shutdown stuff, was that, oh, hold it, I need to go out there and get 360s of the tour, because the same project that was go through and scan actually would work in a 360 tour. So as soon as we get a chance, we're going to do a 360 tour, and we're going to take our same in-person app and walk through it so that somebody could do it from their computer instead of having to go all the way to the university and a conference center and explore the trail. So I think we have a more motivation to find a way to take real places and virtualize them to have the learning experience that you want to or intend to. And then when you go back to the space, it'd be awesome if that same device gave you that mediation in the new space you're going to.
Great. So I'd encourage anybody that has, oh, we just got another one. Let me hear it. Here we go. As we continue to deepen into virtual remote spaces, how do we as educators guide the use of these new superpowers toward a public good?
Oh, yeah. This is the past is new again scenario. One of them is looking at, like, you know, people kind of have a bad reaction to Second Life, but oddly, there was a lot of work done there. A lot of good work about like superpowers. So I could cast a tornado, or I could pull in, you know, shared web textures. A lot of useful things that if the technology we're using today, we're doing the same stuff, but just updated and not in like a kind of a weird, I don't know. You can't change the environment. You make the environment yourself. So you need to reconstruct what you would want that environment to be. But I think that taking a page out of some of those best practices kind of helps now. There's drop-in virtual worlds where I just want a note card that gives me a guide to just say, hey, just use these buttons. So there's like little simple things that make ease of life, the lifestyle stuff easier. Like, you know, what is the assignment I'm doing? Where should I be? Can I get there quickly? All of those things are there. It's interesting with the Zoom and these environments, we all know where we're going. We're all put into them. And we're not really given many superpowers. If I use a virtual camera, which you can't use in Zoom, I could flip my colors up. I could substitute myself. I could throw a DeepFake avatar. But you know, those are things that in the contract of social goodness we're sort of not doing right now. But those superpowers are actually something that I would say can add to a learning experience if it's curated, at least in the beginning.
Great. Okay, a great question from Tom. Given our renewed consciousness for matters of race and structures of power, how should we best understand the Uncanny Valley? What is the notion of the human that underlies this? Solving the Rubik's Cube as a test, for example. Is this culturally specific, culturally limited test or marker? What is the specificity of the task we imagine as the human to explore in this way?
Yeah. So this is like one of the, of course, a challenging area. So like the uncanny is in the way it's defined is kind of looking for what this is in search of the thing. The graph that was put together only gives you a rough estimate of like, hey, if we're talking about robots that move or robots that don't move, it'll be those things. So what we got is a scenario where like we have this new tool that could be like an inception score that says, well, how much does it take to feel human? And then you have like an honesty score that says, well, I might feel a certain way. And then is that uncanny? I could lie and say, no, it doesn't feel uncanny, but I need to know about it in order to do it. But if I wanted to be fooled by it, then my inception value would go up or down. So I'm inventing this sort of, you know, score, but it's right now it's a paper by paper. This action has to have these things. And that's why I was saying, like, you know, you can have inclusivity, you can have accessibility if you define it into your project. I think that's what you really want, is where in my project are these things, you know, and how do I set that up? So this is a great question, but that's what I'm like, you know, like sometimes it being human is also a problem, because essentially it's mediated by a machine and the machine can give you an answer. But again, that context will provide canny or uncanny for that.
Okay, well, I think we are at the end of our presentation time. Thanks again to Rick Anderson for today's wonderful talk, and thanks to all those in attendance. Next week, we have Phyllis Klein of Fab Lab DC, who'll be talking about the impact of the COVID spaces. She will explore how creativity, invention, and discovery are at the heart of our maker culture and the power they have to bring people together even in times of crisis. The following week, we have Rob Yatsko from Berkeley Production Studios. Berkeley's music recording and production facilities are arguably the largest music recording complex in the United States. He'll be talking about how these facilities enable students to synthesize technical knowledge with creativity to produce innovative work. So please join us next week, same day, same time, for the next installment of this series. See you there. Thank you.
Thank you, Jason. Thank you, Rick. See you guys
Thank you,
later.
Rick.
All right, thanks. Yeah, that was fun. Thank you. All right,
Yeah,
bye-bye.
thank you so much, Rick.